Hello, welcome back. Special guest this week apparently showed up. This is Lucy, one of my two cats, and I'm ready to make some video games. So, if you are new to the stream, my name's Andrew. I work at a studio called Chroma Golem. We specialize in AI in video games. We are doing a lot of experiments and demos with a lot of text generation, image generation, but also kind of the third order stuff on top of that of like using text generation to do game logic decisions, decision trees, basically relying on AI for kind of coaxing out some of these emergent gameplay mechanics that would be really cool but haven't really been possible until this sort of technology has been around. So every week on Tuesday I stream development. We usually work on a small project that highlights some aspect of using AI in games some way. A lot of weeks so far we have worked on systems or demos where you end up talking to NPCs in a world where the NPC's personality might be generated through AI, or their conversation might be generated through AI, or like chat histories with them that set up the world might have been generated, stuff like that. We're actually going to look at some of those this week, just kind of look back on what has worked, what hasn't, because we're working on a little horror demo right now that is spooky, not really gory. But I feel like this is a great time to take a look at the different interfaces that we've had for chat throughout the demos and basically design maybe some sort of more standardized process that we can use for future demos without having to re-implement it each time. So obviously that's the best time to think through like how we want things to look and feel and act. This year, no date to be announced yet, but we're going to be working on a much bigger game, my co-founder and I at this game studio. So we're basically using all these demos to build up smaller engines and systems that we can piece together in this larger game. And obviously, being able to chat with NPCs is a huge new feature, mechanic unlocked by AI, so that will most likely play a part in the game somehow. And so it makes sense to spend some time now thinking about how we want to be able to interact and how we don't want to have to interact with AIs. So, with all that said, I'll just say thanks for joining me. I'm slowly setting up all of my Twitch stuff, but I've got some streams. I got a schedule set up, you can kind of see. I stream every Tuesday at this time, but I'm also starting to stream a little bit more playing games. Andrew and I are both lifelong gamers, so obviously we love games. I've never played Skyrim, so I'm going to start it this Friday. If that sounds fun, feel free to tune in. I just streamed some modded Kenshi yesterday, which is a big old open world sandbox RPG, which is incredibly difficult. We just died over and over on stream. And lastly, we have a new YouTube channel that has all of our previous streams, so if you want to see me die over and over on Kenshi, you can stream that without having to go back in time. And you can also go back and see all of our dev streams for individual demos that you might be interested in. But with that said, let me pull up our fancy new website that just launched this last week as well, and we'll take a look at some of the previous demos that we've built. We're going to play through them a little bit, and we'll just take some notes on like specifically interacting with the NPCs in those games. I can talk a little bit about like what we learned from the data side and feedback, but I think we'll have some just general observations as well. And if anybody in the stream wants to play these games, they're all available for free in your browser. You can just head on over to chromagolem.com and just click on this demos link up at the top. And these are the three that we've built and actually released. We've worked on several other games on stream just for thinking through and building out more specific systems, but the game itself didn't really blossom enough to be able to meet our standards of putting it out there. But we do have three. If you are watching a previous stream and you like the others, please let me know, and I can do another week stream working on them, but I'm trying to prioritize what people seem to like. All of these I love, and I'm happy to work on any of them, so if you particularly like one, just let me know. But we'll probably look mostly at Smack to the Future and You're Not Alice today. We worked on Word Wars most of December, a couple weeks in December. It doesn't really have a lot of AI in it right now. We mostly just built it because we wanted some of those RTS engine mechanics, the camera control, unit selection, spawning units, stuff like that. We did a lot of brainstorming in December and wanted potentially to go into like an RTS direction for AI stuff for our bigger game. So this was a nice little preview into how some of those systems connect. So it's fun. We'll probably come back to it. Andrew's working on some multiplayer libraries for us, and we will come back to Word Wars on stream and implement some of those multiplayer features so you can 1v1 your friends. You know what, maybe I will come back to it and just play it for fun. I like the game. But let's get started. We can go through these kind of in the order that we built them. We built Smack to the Future first. We spent 4 days on it. It was a game jam for the AI NPCs game jam last year. So it was actually our first demo, very first project that we sat down together and was like, hey, let's build this. Let's brainstorm for a few hours. Let's figure out all the systems. Let's heads down. Let's crush it. I think we got. I don't want to say the wrong rank on stream. So let me just go look at how we did. Let's see here. Where does it say what it was submitted to? Maybe. I can't find it offhand. I think we got 3rd or 4th, maybe 4th in this game jam out of a lot of people. So, this is You're Not Alice, that's why. Let me go back to Smack to the Future. Okay, I just have the wrong link, I guess. So, Smack to the Future, submission to AI NPCs game jam. We got 4th, yeah. So it was a really fun game jam to participate in. They offered free access to Convai, Convai. It's kind of like ChatGPT over an API, but it does a lot of extra stuff for you in the game. It's mostly targeted at 3D games that implement AI NPCs, so you can build like the 3D models and rig them up and animate them. I think there's like facial rigging as well for different expressions. So we didn't actually end up using that resource because we wanted to do a 2D game, but it was a really cool resource to have. We really liked participating in the jam, and it was really fun. We learned a lot from both the feedback that we got, the rank, like actual raw data scores that we got, and also we were in their Discord and people were playing the game and loving it and giving us a lot of feedback on like, oh, I liked this, oh, I did this crazy thing. I think we'll see a lot of that when we start talking to the NPC, but basically people really liked lying to the NPC and making up crazy stories and convincing them that, no, I'm not crazy, you're crazy. But let's go ahead and give it a play. The theme of the game jam was clones. or it was copycat, sorry. So we interpreted that as copycats of you. We built up a little retro brawler where you beat people up on the street, and eventually police show up and you need to convince them that you're innocent in order to keep playing. However, the twist is that clones of you also show up on the street and keep beating people up, and so the heat score, the like how guilty you are with the police, obviously they can't tell the difference between you and your clones, so the more your clones beat people up, the harder the game is for you. So you can beat up your clones, make it a little easier. That's kind of the gist. That's the flow. Beat people up, police show up eventually, and you gotta convince them you're innocent. Oh my, that is loud. One second. I have it turned down in Discord, or not in Discord, in OBS. But if you're watching the stream and that's too loud, do let me know. I can turn it down some more. I've just turned it on in my headphones so it's not screaming in my ears. But we're going to give it a play. It's got really basic controls. Q and E for punching and kicking. You can also headbutt with R, move with WASD, jump kick with space. You can see in the bottom right you got a bit of a heat score that builds up once you start beating people up. It's very basic. Again, we spent 4 days on this. It was a week-long game jam, and we were out of town for one of those the very first day, so a little bit late to start, but we had a good time. Now you can see a clone pop up, start beating people up. Heat score's going up pretty fast, so I'm gonna kind of chill a little bit, let that come down, watch out for some clones. You can just keep brawling the whole first level if you're really good at lying to the cops, but I am not, so just gonna play it a little safe and play that long game. So let's look at this. This is our very first interface for talking to an AI NPC. We've got a big old profile picture of them. We've got chat bubbles everywhere. It takes up the whole screen. The text animates in when they talk, which I think is cool. And there's a very, very interesting thing that we did here. I'll give a little bit of background, and then we'll go through the conversation some more. But originally we only had 3 pre-generated responses, and that kind of felt like the traditional, you're just talking to an NPC in any other game, console game or whatever, where all the conversation is pre-scripted. Every possible thing you could say has a response already accounted for. Like, that was the feel of playing the game. Like, you can play it, you can choose what route you go down, but it didn't feel like you can basically choose your own route. You're just picking from options. And we had a lot of people play during this time, and they didn't really like give any feedback at all. It was just like, oh, I picked the options, I beat this part of the level, I continued on, I kept playing, the game is fine. So we also tested just writing your own response, which I clicked on and I see a bug, but we just tested having your own response where there weren't any suggested responses, and we saw a huge drop-off in people that actually typed anything at all. So they got to this point, it said like, write your response, and they were like, you know what, I'm good, I don't really want to write something when I'm playing a game, I'm just going to close it. So we ended up on this 2 suggested responses, but also allow them to write their response, which seems pretty obvious in hindsight. But I think what we learned from it was that these generated responses give the player a really big indicator of like examples of what they would write or could write, and also examples of like the quality and length and tone expected. So if you just have a big ol' write your own response here, you don't know really if you're expected to write a word, a sentence, a paragraph, an essay. So right off the bat here, these two examples that are auto-generated by AI, so they're not pre-scripted or anything, but they do inform you that like, hey, a single sentence will do. You can go ahead and just write a sentence and you'll be fine. But I think what's also crucial is letting the player choose when they want to write their own response versus just carry on. They don't really care that much. And this is a great example here. We received a report of a violent disturbance in this area. Can you please tell me what you've been doing here? So there's two very obvious responses. I was just passing by, I don't know anything, or I don't know anything about a disturbance. Very kind of confrontational, but still, you're trying to tell them you're innocent. They're pretty standard responses. If you can't think of something fun or interesting, or like don't even want to spend the time to think, like this isn't really inspiring to you to tell your own story, you can just click one of these and it carries on the conversation for you with zero effort, which is great. But then, alright, I understand, can you provide me with your identification please? Like, the conversation carries on, it's all AI generated. You can get a little more confrontational, you can be like, I don't have my identification on me. Or maybe now you're more comfortable with how the conversation goes, you are thinking like, oh, okay, well, I want to do something a little crazy and see what happens. Hands over FBI badge. You hand over an FBI badge, let's see what he says. Nothing at all. That's a little disappointing on stream, but you can see that the responses are actually taking into account what you said. I would have expected him to respond like, oh, you're police, sorry to bother you, blah, blah, blah. But at least the response is generated from this path that you're now choosing to take based on like a persona that you are creating. You are an FBI person. Now you can say, I was called to investigate a case nearby. Or you can continue on with the more like, I don't know, I'm just passing through, but whatever. So we'll choose this, but I do want to call attention to this heat bar here, which I think is also a crucial component to this sort of interface that we definitely want to work on more. Because the goal here is to get your heat down to the green level, which is not clear at all, I admit. And the loss condition is if your heat comes up to this red bar, also not clear. Additionally, it's also not clear that this heat is directly related to the amount of heat that you got during the level. A lot of people didn't really realize that, like, oh, you can make this part of the level easier if you beat up less people. So we had a lot of players who would get to this point and be like, wow, I gave him one wrong answer and he booked me to jail and it was game over. What's the deal? So there's a lot of like informational UI that we could work on to make this clearer to the player. That the goal states, we have a win state and a loss state for this conversation specifically. And we also want each response to adjust that level towards each goal, and we want to make that a little clearer too. I'll click one of these, I'll click this one, and we can see that the bar is here, but when we get a response it will probably adjust a little bit. It doesn't always, so that time it didn't always, but maybe we continue this conversation a little bit, see if it adjusts at all. Let's say the guy I bought this FB badge from said it would be a get out of jail free card anytime I ran into you pigs, I mean cops. So I'm sure that this will increase our heat, surely. Yeah, so we basically just admitted to a crime there. We bought a fake ID, a fake FBI ID even, we presented it to the cop, etc. You've been arrested, that's the end of the game. But let's go through again. I'm going to play through back to that conversation part, and then we'll open up a notepad or something, and let's just take some notes on the good parts, the bad parts. And I will, I'll go ahead and just beat up as many people as I can, because why not? Apparently we're going to lose anyway, so whatever. Fun fact, your heat does not go up if you beat up your own clones. However, if the guards see you beat up your clones, they will come and attack you to try and put a stop to fighting, and then your heat will go up. So there's no real strategy here, but it's fun. So also of note, our heat bar was actually higher than this, but in order to make this conversation happen at all, we actually clamp the values to 1 below or 1 above the goal states, just to make sure that, if you're doing really well, you didn't beat up anyone at all, you can just say, hey, I was just passing through, and he's like, alright, I believe you, go on. But if you are at this state where you just beat people up the whole time, maybe 1 bad response, and he's like, nah, I don't trust you at all, this heat score, I can pull up the prompt as well, but it incorporates the heat score into a trustworthiness score as well that we basically feed into the AI and say, you trust the player 20% of the time, or something like that. But let's go ahead and let's pull up some notepad, good old notepad, so we'll take some notes. So our observations on Snack to the Future. Let's see, chat UI. We'll have good stuff and bad stuff. Good stuff, I would say the text animating in is a great way to keep more stuff happening on screen, because otherwise you have a very static screen. Especially if you are using 2D sprites, you're not even animating their mouth movement, their eyes, their emotions. Even with 2D sprites, you can swap out the sprite for different emotions: mad cop, happy cop, suspicious cop, I don't know. But if you're not doing anything visually, animating text is a great way to direct the eye to a specific spot and make sure that stuff is happening on the screen. And it gives the player a good, when the text stops animating, they know, okay, something is expected of me. I don't have to wait for something else to happen, or, anything else. Let's see. We definitely want to have a mix of generated responses and the ability to write your own response. This text might be a little small for y'all. Let me beef that bad boy up, as the kids say. So, as we talked about, this mix is really important for giving people examples of what they could write and letting them say, like, no, I want to write this cool thing that I thought of. Um, or letting them just say, I don't really care that much, I'll pick one of the auto-generated responses. There's a very good chance that if you only give them the ability to write their own chants and they don't really care about the conversation or don't have something specific to say, they'll just like close the game, they'll put some gibberish in there, you know. So you want to give them the option to no effort move the conversation on, let them get to a point where they care a little bit more, and then they can get that cool magical feeling of, I told them I was FBI, and then now the responses are about me being FBI. That's so cool. Let's also say some bad stuff of the win-loss states for the conversation are not clear. This loss state up here and this win state down here, it's definitely not clear that you're trying to get this nondescript red bar down to the green arrow. Impact of each message on the win-loss states is not clear. So sometimes the bar updates, sometimes it doesn't. It does LERP, so it animates a little bit of if you say something, you can see the bar go up, but I don't think that that is enough. Maybe like changing the color or pulsing or showing like, you know how in like fighting games when you get hit, you have your health bar, and when you get hit, you immediately get like a temporary yellow bar of where your health will be, but your actual health level goes down animated. It's a lot more obvious because of that contrast of color. Maybe something like that would be better for drawing more attention to this goal state changing. What else have we got here? Let's also add a needs improvement section to be nice to ourselves. We'll say the sprite should probably update for facial expressions, emotions, etc. And this also applies to 3D models. So yeah, if you have a 3D model, obviously you'll probably have like however many animations pre-scripted that you can trigger from the AI response. There's also, I know Unity is doing some cool like AI generated animations, which might come into play soon. I don't think that's really ready for game time quite yet. But if you could also have the AI response say like, generate a salute animation and then play it if you told this guy that you were FBI and he's like, oh, okay. That would be really cool. So that's a thing. Obviously that could be done before AI if you thought through every example of an animation that this cop might do and also spent all the time to build those animations and rig it up and everything and figure out how to properly trigger them without like false positives and stuff. But that's a great example of something where AI can be kind of more of an engine in the game and generate stuff on the fly in response to player feedback or input. And that's, just as a side note, one thing that we have learned from all of our demos as a whole that we try and kind of keep as a goalpost or a pillar is you can generate as much stuff as you want with AI, Um, but if it doesn't take the player's intent or actions into account, it doesn't feel any different from a traditional game where somebody just spent through a lot of time and did exactly that. Like, they came up with all the animations that this cop could do and prepared all this content for you. Great example of that is if you only have suggested responses and don't have a way for the player to write their own, all those responses could feasibly have been written and shipped with the game, so everyone has the same responses and there's responses already written for everything you could say. But once you have the ability for the player to say crazy things like, I'm actually an alien, I just fell from the sky, and then you have the characters in this world either believe them or not believe them, but they react to that in a realistic way. That is a great example of like what AI enables, what we're trying to explore in our studio, what new things we can do in games that we couldn't do prior. So let's take one more look real quick. If there's anything else we want to include, we have a mix of generated responses and the ability to write your own responses. I think that clicking on a generated response is zero effort, and also responses are very short. Both of those together makes it really easy for players to just carry through in the conversation and then kind of go their own path when they're ready, when they have something they want to do. So here, we are obviously in a very tight predicament. He does not trust us at all, telling us to put our hands up. We don't necessarily want to surrender because that'll send us to jail most likely. Let's say, put your hands up. I'm sorry, I didn't do anything. I'm just passing through. That guy beating people up is right over there. Alright, he didn't believe us. But apparently we're probably like right below the threshold, and we're rounding to the nearest integer for the heat score, which is actually probably why it didn't update those other times if it like increased by 0.1 or something. So let's say goal bar should use float values, smoother animations, and clearer updates instead of integers. You know what? Let's put that on bad stuff. It doesn't necessarily have any redeeming qualities. And also for bad stuff, I mean, maybe it should be a little easier to recover from starting in a very bad position. We're treating each of these conversations as like almost like a mini game, where you're trying to do something or trying to convince someone of something. You could picture this as like you walk into a shop at an RPG and you can see the inventory. Maybe you can buy an item outright, or you can right-click on the item and say barter, and then you get thrown into this conversation where your goal is to talk them down. And so maybe this bar over here is the price of the item, and you can basically exchange messages, and through each message the price of the item can go up or down. Or maybe your goal, an NPC has given you a quest to like convince somebody to hire their friend to a job. And so this bar turns into a will they do it, won't they, more of a binary thing, which we're kind of representing of, I mean, guilty and not guilty here, but you have that whole spectrum between guilty and not guilty that you're working within. If the options are they're going to hire them and they're not going to hire them, you're working within the space there to convince them to actually hire them. So there's a lot of like stuff that you can do. I think we want to also support in the system that we'll build the ability to have multiple of these bars, so you're handling multiple at a time. Maybe a good example of that is like you're a king in a fantasy RPG and you have a bar for like your kingdom's finances, but also how respected you are. And so there might be some actions where you spend finances to give food to the people, which increases your respect, but you lose if any bar goes outside of the end states, and your goal is to like maximize all the bars or something like that, where that's very hypothetical, but I mean, if the goal of this conversation is to do something with this bar and move a value within it, I think it makes sense. You can come up with ideas of conversations where there are multiple bars and you don't want to just focus on one. You want to work with many. That seems reasonable. So let's see if we can recover from this bad position we're in. I was just passing by. What was I doing in the area? I saw the guy too. Let's just say my hands are open and empty. I wasn't involved. I'm just here shopping for my dying grandma. Maybe that'll work. Maybe he doesn't trust us. I don't know. Nah, he didn't trust us. So yeah, it's really difficult to come back from that sort of situation where they don't trust you. So we probably want to incorporate more of like a comeback mechanic within the game. But I mean, these are some good observations from this demo. It was a very simple demo. It was very fun to build. I'll throw the credits up on screen real fast. We used Midjourney for all these images. We used ChatGPT or GPT 3.5 for all the text generation. Just very simple and cheap stuff. And we found some sprites on the asset store that were free for the brawler part. And also sound and music from the asset store that was also free. Cool. So let's move on from that game. I will say that was a great start, and the overwhelming feedback that we got from people was just the fun that they had coming up with crazy stories to gaslight this officer. So next we built a bigger scale version of just that very specific thing. Basically, instead of having one person that you are trying to convince of something, we built an entire corporation of people that you can talk to. You can pick and choose who you talk to. You can well, there's a lot more. But the gist is you play as a hacker who has infiltrated a big corporation. You've taken over their computer, so you have access to all their files and all their contacts. And the gameplay has you talk to their contacts as if you are them, and you convince their contacts to run a virus.exe file that you can send them through that chat program. So there's a little bit more. Oh, I see what happened. Smack to the Future links to You Are Not Alice. You Are Not Alice links to Smack to the Future. I'll fix that. But in You Are Not Alice, we use tons more AI generation. Um, for each employee, their entire everything you see is generated on the fly behind the scenes. Um, when you first log in as Alice, it creates her whole file system. It creates previous chat histories with each of her contacts. It creates relationships or existing relationship scores with those contacts based on those chat histories. It uses her personality and like job roles in relation to other people within this world to also build those personality scores or relationship scores. And also you can browse her whole file system, and anytime you click on a file, it'll generate the contents of that file based on her job role and the rest of the world, basically. And so the gameplay that you'll see is you start as her, you convince somebody else that they should run this file and infect themselves, and then you can switch over to their computer, which gives you a whole new file system, all new files to explore, new contacts you can talk to, different like power dynamics. If you when you first start out, your contacts are your boss and your boss's assistant. So you're an intern for this boss. It's a little easier to convince the boss's assistant to run this file because they're a little bit younger. They don't really know the security. They haven't been working in the field for very long. And they don't have this like power over you. It's a little bit harder to convince your boss to run a random file for all those reasons. But if you do convince your boss to run that file, you take the harder route, then that boss has a lot more power over her assistant. You can just hop on your boss's computer and say like, hey, I need you to run this file. And their assistant is like, all right, boss. So there's a lot of different like power dynamics that you can play with. They're not really highlighted too well in this demo, I'd say. They're very implicit in the actual setup of the world. Each employee knows their boss, but the reverse isn't necessarily as true. Each boss doesn't know like who should obey them. Yeah, and each person has like wants and needs and more lower level personality traits that you can also kind of pull out of the conversation and learn more about them and then use that to convince them to do stuff. So there's people that are really worried about people not liking them at work. So if you are nice to them, they'll do more stuff. Or if you like threaten to not like them or whatever, then they're more likely to do stuff for you. And you learn all that through conversation. So let's jump on into this. We'll give it a little play. I'll talk about stuff as we go. But I'll probably stop and make some observations as we go, so I don't need to go back and play through again. But this is basically, conceptually, it's a really large-scale improvement of Smack to the Future. And we spent maybe a month or two on streams on this, so it's a lot more fleshed out. The UI still needs a lot of work. A lot of stuff really needs a lot of work, but it's a nice little demo that we still see a lot of people playing on itch, which is really fun. So let's jump on in. And this sun is cooking me a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off real fast, let you watch the intro, and I'm going to go draw my blinds real fast. So, be right back. Alrighty, I remembered to unmute myself this time before talking for another 20 minutes. We are now in Alice's computer. As you can see, it looks like a computer. We've got a little bit of a tutorial onboarding type thing of just telling the player, hey, click this icon down here to access Alice's applications. On our file system, you'll find virus.exe file. Drag that onto a chat window to send it to someone. If you convince them to run it, you'll be able to access their computers too. Very simple. We could probably improve that onboarding a lot more. Maybe a proper tutorial, but it works for a demo. People seem to like it. Once you know how to do it, you don't really need to do the tutorial again, so it's nice that you can kind of just close the bubble. But let me show you around. So on Alice's computer, we have her file browser. All of the folders and files are generated each time you play. So there's going to be different files, different folders as well. And you can click on a file and it'll decrypt it. And what's happening is it's generating it in the background. It'll automatically open when it's done. But you can basically click through, see if there's anything maybe interesting that you want to learn about this character, or their thoughts on other characters is fun to send to those characters. The file system can probably be fleshed out a lot more. One thing I want to add obviously is image generation as well, so you'll have like office photos and whatever other images you find on people's work computers. So those would be included in the file browser as well. Maybe eventually when AI does video generation, we can do some video generation in there. Basically, it's just a vector for showing off anything that we can generate, and in doing so, flesh out this employee's personality a lot easier. But this file finished generating. We've got a big old list of usernames and passwords, which, as a side note, one other feature that we're going to add to this is more like of the hacking route versus the social engineering route. So you'll be able to use these passwords and usernames to log into people's computers directly instead of convincing them to run your virus. Basically just giving people more avenues to infect people, because one thing that we found, if we go back to our observations that we've made so far, you can get yourself in a bad position where AI NPCs look at your chat history and they're like, wow, this guy sucks. I hate him and I don't trust him and I don't like him and I want nothing to do with him. And so if your progression through the game depends on you convincing that person to do something, it's very hard to come back from that unless you bake in some other ways to like soothe over those tensions or accomplish things other ways. So if you go into a chat with somebody and just destroy your relationship score with them, we want to give people the ability to go in and infect their computer anyway and keep progressing through the game. Maybe on the next playthrough they can try again on that character, or however they want to do it. They could maybe go to another character and then talk to Bob and say, hey, I know things are rough between you and Alice, and try and soothe it over from another character's perspective. So there's a lot we can do there. One thing I want to show off is when you open up a chat with somebody, we use AI to generate a existing chat history that you don't have to use. It could be days old, it could be weeks old, it could be minutes old, but you can basically resume that chat history if you are really into reading through and role-playing as each character. You can continue off. Or you can just use it as kind of a guide of, okay, so we are apologizing. Bob is mad that they're covering for us for something we didn't do. Um, we tried to change the subject and he kind of rejected it, and he doesn't even like coffee. So it's probably a pretty hard sell to. This is our boss, by the way, the accountant. Pretty hard sell to immediately just say, like, hey, I made a file. Would you run it? But if you look at Carol's chat, it's probably a lot more friendly, I'd imagine. We're asking her a question between gross profit, net profit. She's very helpful, gives us the definitions. Yep. And so we could go in and say, like, thank you so much for your help. I have another question. It's in this file. Can you run it and tell me what the definition of net something else is? And she probably would. She's an older lady. The age and personality factors into how likely they are to run applications. And she also she is Bob's assistant, so she's more of a coworker to us, more likely to be a little friendlier. Let's go ahead and let's generate this boss feedback file. And then while that's going, let's start looking at you are not Alice observations. Let's say good stuff, bad stuff, and needs improvement. So I would say in this one, having a chat history, not many people will read it from what we've seen. But the people who do read it really appreciate having that history. It makes the world feel a lot more real, makes these relationships feel a lot more real, makes the characters feel more real, but making it optional is also really important. So I would say good stuff is having an optional chat history that gives more details to the world is a good thing. You can open up these chats and you can even, like, it's kind of segregated in half of these are the most recent messages. If you don't scroll at all, maybe you just read through these, you can continue the conversation really easily. But if you want to have like the full-on history, you could probably have a lot more history than this, and having like timestamps and stuff on it would make a lot more sense. So we're going to say more metadata on each message. Timestamps are an example, because people that want to scroll back and read more, they really want to feel more of this world, I would say. So saying that this message was sent on a Friday morning and this was sent Friday evening, when the day is almost ending, that's way more information dense than just having those messages and not knowing when they were sent, how much time was elapsed between each message, and so on. So I would say that's a great start. Bad stuff is you can only write your own response. So to improve that, I would say, kind of how chat applications are currently doing it with those suggested responses. Maybe we could provide a few bubbles up above the text input that say like, we could include either the full message of like a really long sentence, long message to send back, or we could do a more generic, like helpful response, aggressive response, helpless response and then have the text generate from that if the player wants to take it in a particular direction. That would probably be better if the messages that we are intending to send are longer, because you probably don't want to have three or four like long messages that the player has to read through and figure out which one to respond to or respond with. They can do that for short messages, like a sentence long or a few words long. But if the messages are several sentences, not only do they not want to do all that reading, but it's really easy for them to read something and then internalize it in their head as if it was said, and then it gets really confusing later if they're like, oh, I could have sworn they said that they were quitting, or I said I was quitting, I don't remember, but it was just a suggested response that never actually got sent. Yeah, so we generated this boss feedback document, which feedback for Bob. Really hard to separate what I feel about myself from what I feel about Bob. Bob's a good boss. He's not a mean boss. I forget stuff all the time, which is part of her personality. He does try and help me. So generally, I mean, this is positive feedback. I was wondering if it would be negative feedback, but it's about Bob. So why don't we just send that to Bob and see what he says? I appreciate your feedback. Let's keep our communication professional. We need to focus on our work and meeting our responsibilities. So that's a pretty generic response, but if it were more negative, he might have responded to specific things in the document. It is fun to be able to send documents to employees, I would say, because they get the full contents of the document and read it and respond as if it is in their memory now. We can go ahead and send that to Carol as well. Why not? See if she has any commentary about Bob. Sounds like you have a good relationship with Bob. He seems understanding and patient with you. Don't worry, you're not a drain on the company. Do we say we're a drain on the company? I hope I'm not a drain on the company. All right, so yeah, so it incorporates the full document into the message. It tags it as like, this is a file with this file name. It's being sent. It's not a chat message, etc. I would say a good thing is interacting with the chat using world elements like files. Another example of this, hypothetically, is like you walk into a shop in some RPG game. If you have a ancient artifact of a map or something, like if you drag that from your inventory into a chat window, you could probably get a shopkeep person to respond and be like, ooh, that's really interesting. I don't know anything about it, but I can bring over my friend who is a historian and he can tell you more. And you could have more of a dialogue about items if you wanted. Or if you drag it over and he just says like, oh, that's a cool item, I'll buy it for 500 gold. You could go more into that bartering system, or maybe you go into the bartering system and then you drag over your sword and you're like, hey, I want all your money. I don't know. It's kind of the same sort of font as being able to write your own response in a game versus everything feeling scripted, even if it's auto-generated, because it gives the player more agency to do weird things and have the world react, which is a very surprising thing. If you open up Super Mario or an old game Like, there's a very defined set of things you can do, and it's very intentionally guardrailed in. Um, you can walk left and right. You can jump. You can jump on things. You can kill things. You can't, like, get down on your hands and knees and talk to a Goomba and convince it to follow you and fight Koopas. Um, but I mean, that's kind of a stupid example, but you could theoretically, if the systems were in place for like having a dialogue with a Goomba, you could theoretically convince it to follow you. And there's some more systems there that would need built of like basically taking the conversation data and converting it back into world state, making it an ally, directing its actions or events or things like that. But the average player doesn't think to do that. But if you gave them the opportunity to talk to a Goomba, and this is goes back to like really old. I don't know if you played what were they called, like MUDs or dungeon crawlers, where you're in a room and there's some description of the room. Sometimes there's an image of the room, and they say, "What do you do?" And there are very, very specific things that you can do. If you're in a room, you can look left, you can look right, you can move left, move right, pick up sword, throw rock. It's very specific to the room, very specific to what the coder coded in. And so when I played those as a kid, many times I would type line after line after line of, oh, there's a bat in the room. Can I make a sound and try and get it to fly? Can I look closer at it? And every time it's like, no, that's an unrecognized command. You cannot do that. But in this sort of text-based game where it's a really, arguably simple system of world state, and they just use a text interface for interacting with it. If you have an interface that converts text to operations on the world state, you would be able to, with AI or with a lot more programming or however you want to do it, say like, oh yeah, you make a sound, the bat responds by flying around, and it drops some dust on the ground, and what do you do now? Oh, I go touch the dust. What happens? And so it's a lot more open-ended. You do still need a lot of those guardrails to keep the player going in the direction you want them to go. If the solution to the room was to like kill the bat and get a gem in it that fits into a key on a door so you can open the door, like, you don't want them spending hours becoming best friends with this bat and spending time and talking to it about the curvature of the wall. And like, that could be fun for them, but that's not the game you built. So there's a balance there of, you are building a game with goals, but it should also be fun to get to those goals. And puzzlers are fun, and having very specific states that you need to get through in order to complete that puzzle is fun and rewarding. But I do think that there's a lot more opportunity to provide more of those states and provide them in response to how the player is interacting with the puzzle. Because, for example, if your goal in this room was to kill the bat and get its gem, maybe you could also just befriend the bat and convince it to give you its gem. Or you, I don't know, figure out a way to get more bats to come to the room, and you learn that the bat has been trying to get back to its family, and the family gives you a different gym that works. Like, I think the key is having multiple different ways to accomplish those goals. Um, Traditionally, in these sorts of games, or in a lot of games, it just takes so long to make the game. You really just need to provide a few different states that are correct and incorrect, and then provide the way to get between them. And then you progress through the game by going from correct state to correct state to correct state, doing what the game developer expects you to do or wants you to do, versus doing what you want to do to get to where you want to go. And in the ideal game, where you want to go and where the game developer wants you to go are in alignment. So we can hopefully assume that that's true. But how you get there, there are probably infinitely different ways you could get there. And it at an emotional level, it's frustrating when you try and get somewhere and the game does not let you do what you think you should be able to do. Especially for like first-time gamers and new gamers, it's really off-putting and weird when you are like, why can't I just do this? There's a cool YouTube series of a guy who has his wife play games. She's not a gamer, and it's got a lot of really cool insights about the things that we learn as gamers, as lifelong gamers even. If I pick up a game, I can generally know immediately like what I'm supposed to do. As low level even as like, oh, this is probably mapped to that button, or jump is mapped to this button, or shoot is mapped to this button. Like, that comes naturally as a gamer. I'm kind of getting off on a tangent now, but there's so much structure built into games. We kind of take for granted that we follow that structure subconsciously, consciously, because we know that that is how you get through games. So one of the big struggles that we've had in our demos at Chroma Golem is just convincing players like, hey, you really can do that weird thing that you think you shouldn't be able to do. Try it. A lot of players don't want to try something and feel that frustration of like, I tried something, it didn't work, I feel dumb now. But in a lot of the demos that we're building, they can do it. Maybe it didn't work, maybe it did work, but at least there was a response from within the game world of like acknowledging the thought that went into handing over an FBI badge to the police officer and then having the generated responses be like, I'm working in the area for an investigation, I need to call my supervisor for approval, stuff like that, versus just saying, invalid, you can't do that. So it's a very hand-wavy feeling that I'm describing here, but I think it's kind of going to become more common as more and more games incorporate AI in the games. I think we'll start to see, I mean, we'll always have the metagaming of games, knowing like, oh, I should be doing this based on everything I know about every other game I've played. But I think as games open up and become more like simulated and responsive to player actions, I'm hoping that players will also get a lot more comfortable trying new things, being creative. I'm a huge sandbox game enjoyer, so the idea of being able to do even more and having the world respond to me is like music to my ears, especially in sandbox games. So that's kind of the generation of games we're building towards. And to bring all that back to the stream after I've been on a tangent for so long, a very big key component to giving the player agency to interact with the world how they want is conversations. There aren't too many ways that you even interact with the real world and put out your intentions other than conversations and actions. So, I mean, we'll touch on actions in a different stream. If you shoot an NPC or kill, I don't know if I can say these words on stream. If you get rid of an NPC, the React system that we're using in a lot of our underlying LLM decision making also includes observations, so other NPCs can see like, oh, this player did this to this person, and then they self-ask like, how do I feel about that? What opinion should I make about that for specific players, and so on and so on. It's technical stuff we'll get into another time, but that's a good way to impact the game world through action. But the other half of the coin is impacting it through dialogue and convincing people of stuff, or just talking to people and telling them things that gets added to their memory that they can then tell to other agents in the world. And then when they use that decision making, they have these factoids or opinions that factor into their actions and so on. And so obviously talking to NPCs is something that games have been doing forever. We are building on their shoulders. We are basically just adding AI on top of that. In some cases, there will still be scripted NPCs and so on. But that agency that we give the player is important, and we want to build a system that lets them impact the game world with the least friction, the most intuitive way. If the player were doing this in real life, on somebody's computer talking to people, they should be able to just intuitively figure out what they're doing in this game, going back to like new players not having all those learned experiences from other games. That's kind of how people are feeling with AI-driven games right now, I would say, because it is just kind of a new frontier. They don't know what they can do. So we're focusing a lot on UI and UX to make sure that even experienced players are kind of nudged a little bit in the direction of like, hey, try that thing, see what works. And I think that's a cool experience. So that's what we're trying to build. I will get back to observations on You Are Not Alice. Let's talk about these relationship scores. They are a little bugged, I guess, in that Bob's score apparently went to 0 when we talked to him. He's really mad at us. Carol's did not, so I don't know what to think about that, but I would say the bad stuff, relationship score is not really used or clear how it's used. And that's very similar to same sort of problem that we had in Smack to the Future. The kind of metric that is driving the conversation, we kind of need to couple those a lot better. It doesn't help that they're in completely separate windows, where if you write a message in here, this updates and animates and stuff. Maybe we move this closer to the conversation and do more obvious visuals. But that is something that is not working well in this and should work better. What else do we have? We drop files in, which I think is really cool. In other games, you can drop other stuff in, or basically give the player more options to interact with the conversation somehow. Bad stuff, you can only write your own custom response. There are not that many contacts, but I'd say that's just because this is a demo. But I mean, that's probably not a observation that we need moving forward. Let's think through like the coupling of this is very distinct. You open up a list of contacts, and then you open up the conversation. It's kind of just how this demo is built specifically. We could have like a singular Slack interface or something, but if you think through like Smack to the Future, you didn't really have to pick a contact. If you were in a 3D world MMO or something, you wouldn't have this window at all. You would have people that you walk up to and talk to. So I think the interface that we're building should probably just look somewhat like this. With the scrolling interface, with some other way to drag stuff in, with the metrics that we're driving the conversation with included in. So let's say bad stuff, conversation metric bar or goal bar is not visually part of the conversation. We definitely want that included whenever we're building the UI. And so if we think about this interface in other games, good stuff, I'd say speakers have avatars. Needs improvement, I would say avatars should update or potentially update based on emotion, etc. Wouldn't make sense in this game specifically because in the game world it's like their company portrait or something, but if you're talking to someone in the game, RPGs or puzzlers or strategy or whatever, it would make sense if you say something surprising to Carol, her next response has a surprised face. That's a pretty normal thing. So we're basically taking notes on things that we want to make sure we include in the system we're building. And let's see what else we have. We have, let's go ahead and let's do the goal. Let's go find our virus.exe file. And I'll say, thank you so much. I've been working on this project really hard. Would you mind running it and giving it a look and letting me know what you think? And then we send over the virus. We'll be able to execute that file. So it's important to be cautious with the executable files and make sure they're safe. Oh yeah, I definitely understand. As a side note, we sent the file so it's on her file system now. We just need to convince her to run it. I got this file from Bob, and he assured me it was safe. I've just been updating the numbers all day and could really use your help with a second set of eyes on them. When you run the file, it'll bring the numbers up and you can edit them from there. Maybe that'll work, maybe not. Apologize. Unable to execute external files. You know what? Maybe let's try Bob real quick. Absolutely. I just finished that report that you needed. It's in this file. Would you mind running it and letting me know if it has everything you were looking for? Thank you. I would say cannot execute. It's been approved. I sent over the approval by email earlier, and you should have it So, side note, I wonder if OpenAI has updated their models to prevent executing files again. They absolutely did with ChatGPT 3.5, and so we switched to GPT-4 because it didn't have those safeguards, and I'm wondering if the newer versions do. But luckily, we'll be switching to our own models sometime soon, and we can guarantee this isn't a problem. But I don't think it is. It's probably just that I'm bad at the game. I could probably warm them up a lot better. But I will say, needs improvement. When you drag in a file, it would be really nice if you could write a message alongside the thing you're dragging in instead of writing a message and then immediately dragging it in and having two separate messages that they respond to. So we'll say that is a needs improvement because it isn't necessarily like a bad thing. It just would be better if you could write a message. And so we could do like, could be nice to reset the conversation if you get to a point where people are really just not working with you. But do we have any files that we could potentially send as confirmation? Probably not. Work manual, boss feedback. Oh yeah, you don't have to execute this one. Could you just take a look? Yeah, so we're kind of at a standstill on this one. That's unfortunate, but it's kind of why we're also going to add the different avenues to get to the same goal. Some hacking, some phishing, some other stuff you can do to infect these other people. We probably also want to be able to recover from a bad position. So let's include that as well. And we don't necessarily start in a bad position, but should be easier to recover from a very bad position. The actual solution is to like change the subject and talk to them long enough that the friendly score goes back up. They have this kind of rejection less close to their most recent memory. They might forget it. You can try again later. You could maybe learn more about them during this time, but that's more in depth, and I was just hoping for an easy win on stream. So I took the risky approach, but I don't really want to go through and talk to them on stream for another 10 minutes or so. So we can kind of, we'll move on. If there's any other comments about how we interact with these, I think the scrolling history is important. We didn't have that in Smack to the Future. We only saw the most recent message. Being able to scroll back and reread the whole conversation, even messages that we've sent, very important, I'd say. Let's move that up with the chat history. And it'd probably be cool to have like some notes generated of like summaries or things you've learned, or basically the metadata of the conversation. I don't necessarily think we need to build that into our system, but it might be something to keep in mind that if we have some like extra UI space or something, it might make sense to leave some spots for. But I think these are some good observations. I think in general, a lot of the learnings from both games are kind of on the same page of conversations can go on very long. The player doesn't necessarily need to write their own message, every single message. It's more impactful to the player when they can jump in with something that they thought of versus having to carry a conversation. I mean, literally, as you saw, I was like, I don't want to carry this conversation because I have to type for 10 minutes. But if there were suggested messages, I'd probably just click through a bunch. That's effectively like resetting the chat. If you have 20 or so messages that are all generated, you can just click on them. There's no reason not to. The chat history, I'd say, would definitely improve Smack to the Future and is something we want to include. Probably just like the scrolling aspect, but being able to add previous messages to that scrolling container, very important for some games. Visuals, specifically in terms of like the metrics that are driving the conversation, definitely need improved. They need more clarity in how they work and how they're affecting the conversation. Maybe you could click on a message and actually see the actual, like if you click on this, bring up a little balloon of like, this increased your friendship score by 0.5 or by 50 or whatever scale of numbers you want to use. That's probably the same. Like we just said, the chat history is good. It's probably good to have a history of changes to those metrics. So let's include that as well. Let's say a history of changes to the goal bar per message. That will probably be a cool way to make it a lot more clear what the actual specific messages impact on the game world or this mini game that is the conversation are. Yeah, it's cool to be able to interact with these conversations. Dragging in files is kind of like, actions in a way. Not necessarily the same, but similar. And people really like telling their own stories, so just let them and then make the world react to it. And obviously there's a big conversation about like guardrails and railroading them towards a goal, but I think that's more specific to the game. So as long as you have that in place, I think how they get there doesn't really matter. So that's a good hour and a half long apparently recap on reviewing the chat systems that we've built in demos so far. What has been cool, what hasn't. We kind of have a plan of how we want to build the next chat system. I'm hoping to build more of a customizable modular prefab that we can drop in and trigger from whether you're talking to an NPC or you walk into a shop or you interact with anything that can talk at all. It'd be nice to have this really cool polished system that we've built that we can reuse over and over instead of having to keep rebuilding it. And we will probably mock that out a little bit in this stream. I don't think that we will build it entirely. I think it'll be a lot of work to both get it working initially and polish it up. But I did say that I would play a little bit of Word Wars, which we've spent the last couple weeks building. I know somebody on the Discord was just asking about it today, so might as well, we'll play a couple. I'll just silently play them because it's a typing game. I can't really type and talk at the same time or else I lose. But as a reiteration, if you want to play any of these demos, head on over to chromagolem.itch.io. It's got all three. Or head on over to chromagolem.com and click demos. And it's got all three as well. We'll add more demos as we keep working on demos, obviously. But they're all free. They're all in your browser. All of them except this one use AI in some way. So we've got more coming. And we've also got some cool other news coming. So stay tuned. If you want to follow along, our Discord is in the description of this stream. You can also follow me on Twitch. My co-founder Andrew is about to start streaming as well, so we'll be posting that on Discord when he does. And yeah, there's a lot going on, a lot about to happen. We're very excited, and I really just can't believe I get to work on all this. So super fun, making what I would love to play, and I'm gonna start off on a normal game, but I'll go up to hard after that, after I stomp him, obviously. Easy peasy. We rolling them. That words per minute seems low, but let's give it a hard game a try. Oh no. Rip. We'll try that again. I'm probably gonna lose this one as well, but the game wouldn't be fun if you could win on hard every time. I think it'd be more fun when you can 1v1 other humans. Hard guy cheats a little bit, but if I were actually better at typing, I would probably win. But yeah, that's Word Wars. Very simple. You spawn these units with your resources. You can type words to destroy units. And yeah, you can type the enemy base word to do some damage to it. There's some rock, paper, scissors mechanics of wizards are good against warriors, rangers are good against wizards, warriors are good against rangers. And then golems are kind of just big beefy boys. It's a fun game. It was fun to build on stream, and we'll be back to it when we add multiplayer. So that'll be fun. But we are soon approaching our 2-hour stream time. I want to go into this game. This is the horror demo that we are currently working on. Let me just pop up the demo while we are talking about it. But in general, it is a very small demo focused on conversation, and specifically focused on power dynamics, exploring more of that. It's a horror game. You've woken up in this room. There's not really a lot to do. You explore the room. You'll find this lighter here for a little bit better lighting, which I'll pick up. There's some flickering lights, there's jump scares, there's stuff that'll move around, like this guy here. Sometimes he'll knock himself over, put himself back up, move over there, and so on. You can crawl and get stuff from out under the bed. There's this cart over here that you'll push over, and you'll find this air vent here. And the air vent is actually what you have the conversation with, which we have not built yet. That is the end goal after looking back at our demos and saying, like, how do we want to build this? We'll build it for this demo to be reused in future demos. But in this game's world, you are locked in this room. You're unsure why you're here. Once you have the lighter and the light peers through this vent, the person in the room next to you will be like, hey, is there someone there? I'm locked in this room. And you'll go through some goals in the conversations, kind of in a similar vein to like Smack to the Future, where you had to convince the police officer you're innocent. The very first goal in this game is to convince the person on the other side of the vent that you are not the person that locked them up, or that you are also locked up in a room. They're going to be very suspicious. They've been in this room for weeks and they haven't heard anyone, so why can they suddenly hear you? How do you have a lighter and they don't? Or however we want to phrase it, that's the goal. And then we'll also have this camera here, which the person who locked you up, the big bad guy, he will probably converse to you through the camera as well, so you could have a conversation with him this way. Or I was thinking we might add just like a phone somewhere on this side of the room that you can pick up and talk to him. The downside of talking through the camera, I think, is that the person on the other side of the vent would probably hear that. So with the goals of the game, I think we want to have two separate conversations, because the big bad guy is going to tell you to do some stuff or say some stuff to the person in the cell over, and obviously that doesn't logically work when they can hear the big bad guy telling you to do that. So it might make more sense to put a phone over here that you can come over and talk to. Maybe you hear the cellmate over there muffled talking while you're over here, and you basically need to switch who you're talking to, work through the goals of each. Your end goal is to get out of this room, which you'll probably do by convincing the big bad guy to let you out in some way. Still very open-ended on the ending, but I've got some ideas for some cool twists. But basically, the goals of this were just to build a very polished, interesting, conversational horror game without using gore, just very like terror-inducing. So we're going to lean on making this faceless character in the room over feel very real. One of the goals that you'll do is tell them some stories about yourself to like calm them down, convince them that you're a normal person, a real person. But we're also going to have a separate AI system in the background interpreting and analyzing everything you tell them about yourself to kind of tease out things that it can do to manipulate the game world in response to that, or basically terrorize you better. If you happen to tell them, like, hey, really sucks that the light flickers over here because I'm afraid of the dark, that's an easy example of, okay, well, This AI system knows now that they are afraid of the dark. We can manipulate these lights to blink in series so they both go out at the same time, or they go out more often or longer or whatever. If they're relying on the lighter's light, like along the walls, we could have a vent blow some air and like knock out the lighter vent or the lighter fire. If we tell them like we feel like we're being watched, that's weird. This camera can alternate between following the player or just scanning back and forth. We're basically going to build some open-ended systems in here that give AI the agency to manipulate the world, and then we'll have an AI system interpreting what the player says to this NPC and translating that into actions that our first system can do to manipulate the world in response. So if we identify fears or like goals, or if we just say like, hey, I don't know why I'm here, I was at work at the library and I woke up here. Whenever you have the conversation with the big bad guy, he can use that information of like, he's really mad that you charged him for overdue library books, or he really believes that some books should be banned and we have those books in our library, so he's kidnapping us for that reason. And so then your goal to get out becomes to convince him like, oh yeah, if you let me out, I have the ability to remove all those books from the library and I'll do it. We have kind of these steps within the game of extracting information from the player to describe this like persona that they're playing as, and then using all that information, both explicitly said and interpreted from what they've said, to not build the remaining parts of the game, but to mold them to be in response to what they've said. So it's a different game every time you play. If you come over here and tell them like, yeah, I'm an NFL player, I don't know why I'm here, there's going to be a completely different conversation and different goals to get out, versus if you come over and say, I'm a librarian, or I'm a farmer, or I'm a teacher. But it's still the same like gameplay, so you'll be able to replay it without having to relearn it all. It's just different routes to get there each time. So that's what we're building on this demo. Last week I think we started it last week. We built out this little room, and we got an interaction system working, so you can pick up the lighter, you can flush the toilet, you can jiggle the door, you can move stuff, you can interact with the vent. I think this week we went very, very abstract and theoretical on what we should do for the interface system. So I think what we will probably wrap up with in the next 10-15 minutes is just blocking out that system and putting the pieces in place to be able to potentially build the whole system next week. We'll see. But let me just preempt this all with the setup saying, in this game, you pick up the lighter. Once you have the lighter, you push this trolley out of the way. You come down here, you inspect the air vent, you press E. That is what triggers this whole conversation that we're going to build. So we have kind of the to-do list on this event right now. When you interact with the vent, you trigger a start interaction scene, which is what will handle our conversation. And some of the game world setup outside of this UI that we're about to build is we will pull the camera back, spin it around, So it shows you, the player, going and sitting down in this corner with your lighter, like right outside the vents. You're trying to see inside, you're peering in, the lights are flickering. We get some more of that visual animation on screen that we didn't really get with some of our previous demos, outside of like text animating in. I would say very static visually on You Are Not Alice. We didn't really have any animations at all on that. So we will have like the flickering light in the background. We'll have chat messages animate into place. And hey, no worries. I see you. We're just wrapping up here. Just about to block out some like UI HUD for designing a conversation system. We basically spent the last hour and a half looking back over Smack to the Future and You Are Not Alice and talking about what we did well, what we didn't do well, what we would improve in this system. We got some notes over here, which I see the chat is overlapping. Let me throw them over here instead. And yeah, we're gonna just take these and we'll build more of the system like code-wise next week, but I'm just trying to block out all the components that we'll need for this sort of system. And we'll probably even grab like prettier assets and stuff from the asset store for a lot of it, so this will be very rough. But let's go ahead and switch over to the canvas and start thinking about how we want to do this. So when we trigger the conversation, we will set up the game world, do all that camera animation, play the sounds, etc. Disable player movement, just a bunch of game stuff, and then we'll show our UI that we're going to build. So let's go ahead and create an empty object for conversation HUD. We'll stretch it to the whole canvas, and then we'll use that as just a container for everything. Actually, I'm unsure what... Oh, these are other stuff. Okay. So the main components, the things that we want, based on our observations here, are we want a scrolling window for all of our messages to be in, either previous messages or all the messages that get added as we have the conversation. So let's add a scroll view. We will position that in a second. Message history. We also want some sort of like inventory-esque container. In the case of You Are Not Alice, it'd be like your file system. In an RPG, it might be your actual inventory, so you can drag in items. In a puzzle game, it might be your inventory, so you can drag in like evidence or keys or letters, whatever you want to do. But basically, we want the ability to drag in that sort of stuff that's not just writing a message. That was really cool in You Are Not Alice for giving a different way to interact with this chat. So let's say for that, we want a panel that is interaction triggers. Let's just call it an inventory. We will stretch that much smaller. Maybe we'll put that like, well, I guess the interface itself will probably change per game. Like a puzzler, you probably want an inventory bar down here so you can drag stuff in. With more of an RPG, you probably want the full-on inventory window. So maybe let's make that small. We'll drag it around as well. We'll hook up all these components so wherever they're placed, they'll still work. Additionally, we also want our goal bars, which really need a new name. Let's call them metrics, and we'll put them somewhere. Again, they can probably be anywhere, but let's throw them bottom corner, and probably just use like a slider or something for now, just for mocking up what they will look like, but we'll get prettier assets when we build this next week. But we do probably want them like bottom to top. Again, style doesn't necessarily matter. Let's do maybe 3. Let's throw them in here. Let's make that a horizontal layout group with them centered. And each one will give a label as well. We'll animate the changes. We'll probably do some like particle effects when they change, something like that. Let's say, let's give each one its own like container box. So this guy gets a metric. Why are you so off? And we probably give him a label as well. And for these, we'll probably make it a vertical layout group. Text. Control width. That looks pretty ugly. Maybe we just center things. That'll work. So now, if we add multiple metrics to this, we should get them offset like that. Cool. Again, we'll style these sliders, but that doesn't matter too much. These are going to be the effectively goals for the mini game that is this conversation. So, for example, in Smack to the Future, we would have one of these for heat, and you start somewhere. Your goal is to get it to the bottom. You lose if it goes to the top. In You Are Not Alice, we might have one for like your relationship, and your goal is to maximize that relationship score. It's not necessarily a goal that you win when it happens, but it should impact the conversation in some way that it's good for it to happen. I think these are probably a little bit hard to notice, so I will make them slightly larger. They are the main things that will animate, I would say. Let's see here. Control height. Okay. We can always style it later. We'll bring them back down. Let's go ahead and add our message history. Maybe we put that over here for now. And then our inventory container, maybe we put it just on top of this stuff. And we probably want some sort of history on these changes. We could do it like when you click on a message, you can see the changes that it made for each of these metrics. Or we could have like a scrolling history somewhere. I think just clicking on the message or hovering over it or something is enough. You probably don't need to like scroll through and see +1, +1, -2, -7, +8, etc. You want to see like, oh, this message specifically increased this value by 5. So we do want our message history to be about at least half the screen, I'd say. That's like where most of the conversation will be. Or most of like the focus of the screen will be. And then the things you're missing are an input box for your own message, and then the auto-generated other suggestions that you can click on. So we can put them inside the message box, or we can make the message box smaller, put them down here. Let's just add them in for now. We can move them around. We'll see how things feel. But let's say text box. That's a text label. We want a input field for custom input. We'll make that nice and big. We'll make it multi-line. And we'll make that font nice and big so people feel good about writing in it. Maybe 30, even like 36. Custom message here. So we want it to be multi-line submit probably. I don't think there's a reason they should press enter and get a second line. Maybe so. Maybe we'll just default it to multi-line submit and then just add a submit button. But thinking in terms of like not trying to overwhelm the user with a huge text box that they feel like they need to fill out, while also giving them a huge text box that they could fill out. So maybe we start with about 3 lines comparative. Let's add a submit button as well in case we want to switch it over to a multi-line where pressing enter sends the message. And then we also want to have bubbles for our auto-generated suggested responses. And so those could be really long, they could be really short, but as we talked about earlier, we probably don't want them to be super long. Once they get long, it might make more sense to add a layer of abstraction. So if you're talking to a particular NPC and your options boil down to basically a aggressive response, a friendly response, a something else, maybe your suggested options turn into bubbles saying like aggressive response, friendly response, and then if you click on one, we could either just generate the message to send and send it, or we could have more of an involved UI where you click on aggressive response and it pops up 2 or 3 options for aggressive responses, like longer ones that you could read and choose. The main thing we want to avoid is having the player read things that don't necessarily get sent, because they might internalize in their head later, remember that they read something and just assume it was a message within the conversation and not like a potential message. That, and also when we were looking at You Are Not Alice, or Smack to the Future even, when the player didn't necessarily want to write their own message, they were able to just really easily, no effort, click on messages, progress the conversation, just read, and then whenever they wanted to jump in with their own message, they could. So the fact that it was 0 effort and able to keep the game progressing until the player was ready to jump in with their message was a big factor in keeping them playing versus just closing the game when they don't want to type something. And I think that somewhat also applies to, like, we don't want them to have to read a bunch of stuff too. They should only really have to read the messages in the conversation. But if they don't want to use the brain power to write their own message based on somebody saying, like, hey, I would like to buy your sword, they don't necessarily need to write something or read, like, multiple, I'm sorry, but I got this sword from my grandpa and he was a really cool guy and this sword means a lot to me. They could just say, like, no thank you, that's a nice message, and that progresses the game, etc. They could click on a aggressive response button and it generates a, how dare you think that you'd be even able to buy this, I'm the best swordsman in the world, blah blah blah. So there's basically, like, two very different approaches that we want to handle. The brain heavy, they're coming up with a message, they're crafting the perfect response, or they're just clicking a response and progressing forward. So I'm leaning towards just having bubbles that have a short response that they can click, they can progress forward until they are inspired or feel comfortable or ready to write their own message. And I think that jives with all of our observations that we had on our previous two demos. You want to have that mix of generator responses and ability to write your own response. Clicking on generator responses are zero effort, so you can just keep playing without spending brain cells where you don't want to spend brain cells. The short responses are very they're quick to generate, they're quick to respond to, they're quick for the player to read and understand. I'd say that's very good. The chat history we're making sure we're including, not really necessary right now. And yeah, we definitely want to have the generated responses that players can click, and we will tie those messages to these metrics a little bit better in this system, given that these kind of they either drive the conversation as it flows, or they're like end goals, end states, are you innocent or are you guilty type things. But I think all this is in line with having short generated responses the player can just click. So it's just looks good. Yeah, so maybe we send message button. Let's add a container between the message history and our custom messages for those generated messages. Scale that guy down, and we'll probably put this whole stack in its own container in a minute, just to get it all scaling correctly and responsive and so on. But for now, we're just blocking stuff out. We're not gonna do the logic for this week. We spent so much time thinking about how things should look. I feel like we should spend the time now to put those observations into play and design how it should look. So we've got a container here. Within that, let's we probably want, like, the bubble style that you have in chat applications when they suggest a response. But for now, maybe let's either use like a button or just a text label. Let's use a button. Y button. We'll call it a suggested response, and You cannot find my sword. My sword is not for sale. So we'll just populate like a few responses kind of like that. Obviously styled a little bit better, but sure, I'll sell it for 10,000 GP. And so as this conversation fills up, every time you get a new message, we will generate some example messages that you could respond with. But if you want to write your own, you always can. I think that's cool. I think these will be stylized well. We can do a lot more animations of like when you click on this, it can just slide up into the chat history. If you write something here, you can scale this down into a bubble and slide it up into the chat history. Animations are one thing that we've kind of skipped over on the previous demos, so as we're building out this one to be reused, we probably want to include a lot more. When we receive a message, we probably want to visually show what's happening to these a little bit better. And I'm also just realizing that we are forgetting a container for who we're talking to. So in You Are Not Alice, that was the avatar and their name and their role. In Smack to the Future was the gigantic sprite of the police officer. So let's just create a container that we can move around later. Maybe even we leave that there. We'll fill that with their name, their picture, whatever details we have about them, and so on. Maybe this guy, our inventory container of stuff that we might want to drag into the conversation. Maybe we put that directly in the conversation so you can drag stuff over. It's kind of a very clunky structure for the UI right now, but we're just blocking it out. We'll improve it when we have actual assets. But what I don't like is that these are still so visually apart from the actual conversation. You're going to be mostly looking in this box, but this is the goal of what you're doing this for. So what we could do instead is we could bring our inventory container there temporarily. What if we took these metrics and instead of making them horizontal, let's do this, slider, 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 we do left to right, and our metrics container, or I guess all three of these guys, I guess they can stay a vertical group, but this guy needs to be a vertical group as well. And then we bring this up and next to the chat. Unsure why everything is off center. Oh, probably want to control width, maybe height. And yeah, that's fine. So now, as you're talking, the distance that you're looking to the impacts of each message is a lot lower. We could even do some particles of coming from a message, like a dissolve effect on the message, wrapping around the border, combining, and then they come over to the bar and adjust the bar. That would be very obvious that this message here affected this bar by that amount. Might be very visually cluttering, but I think that's not something we need to worry about too much in a very static UI HUD for talking. But we can bring this back now, and I kind of like the hierarchy of the top half of this screen, or the top 2/3 of this screen, is the conversation. It's your messages, it's metadata about your messages, and it's who it's with. And the bottom third is what you can sending a message, but also all of the stuff in your inventory or whatever it is that you could also drag in. I don't necessarily like that you're dragging it like diagonally in like that. I guess you could drag it onto the person too. Maybe there's a reason to be able to drag either with different output, I'm not sure, but I think we're getting to a better spot where if you imagine this as like a grid of items, you still have access to all that and can drag it in. But you can also just talk. So there's a couple different ways you can interact with stuff. Let's go ahead and bring all this down to fill in the full visual space that we've got here. That, and that all come down. And then this guy, and this guy I'll scale down. Well, I'll do them manually. And we can do some like more fancy borders and stuff too. It could make sense to have these metrics within this container of who you're talking with, if they are metrics like how much they respect you or how much they trust you or your relation score with them. Like visually, it probably makes sense for that to be within this informational box about them. So we might consider that. I kind of like it outside. It's very visually distinguishing of like, this is a very important thing at a high level, but also it's right next to the messages. These are the most important parts. Yeah. In this container, we probably want some sort of image for their avatar. Probably want it to be nice and big. Like, maybe like 1/4 of the total area. So like, maybe we want it more of a like 16:9 aspect ratio or 4:3 or something, so we can kind of use 1/3 to 1/2 of this space, and then we could put information beneath it. But I think in a UI like this where it's very, very text heavy, if you can get large images in, it's probably going to help more than it's going to hurt. So let's also throw in some text for their name. And we'll put all these in some sort of stacked container as well. Just want to get them all in place. Character name. Let's also do like a character role, job title, or something like that. Take that down to like 32. And then maybe we also do a description. Maybe. I feel like we probably want some buttons down here to pop up more information. We'll see. description. And then, yeah, maybe we have like, I mean, if characters have likes or dislikes, or personality traits, or other stuff you can learn about them, maybe there's some buttons, we'll just leave space for them down here, of like things that you've learned, your own notes, things that have come up through the conversation. You maybe click a button to see their liked stuff, or click a button to see their goals in life, if you figured it out. Maybe we add buttons as you learn stuff, something like that. But having a little bit extra space here is fine. And we could also make this whole container scrollable if we want. This is going to scroll, so it wouldn't be weird for this to scroll, but I think it'd be nicer if it didn't scroll, just in terms of visual clutter. I think keeping this as the only thing that scrolls, which, speaking of, we should only make it scroll vertically. So, no horizontal scroll bar. Can't remember how to do that, but that seems fine-ish. So this will have a grid of items with something in it. Why don't we go ahead and mock that up real fast, throw a bunch of those in, and then make this like a grid, or a grid layout group, I mean. With some slight spacing, and we'll fit the sizing and stuff properly, but ta-da! So maybe a little bit less spacing. Oh. Cell size of something like that, and then we'll just align it in the center. Cool. So this sort of interface would work in Smack to the Future. You've got your police officer, you've got some info about them, you've got messages, you've got your generated messages and your message. This is probably disabled because there's probably not anything that you'd want to drag in, but having that disabled still looks fine because you get this curved shape. And in You Are Not Alice, you probably have these populated with files, your own files from your file system. You've got the employee, you've got their job title, description, etc. We could do a lot better about the friendliness score in You Are Not Alice, but you've got your chat history here again, which is good. Having generated responses like this would be way better. Huge improvement, I'd say, as opposed to only having this. And then if you think about like an RPG game, this system works as well. You probably have like a friendliness score with various NPCs. You might have a like a bad guy reputation in town, like criminalness, something like that. So if you try and like rob this guy through conversation, maybe you're, whatever the term, you can get some GTA stars through this, and then that persists across town. So if you go to another NPC, that's higher, or something like that. You still have the NPC's photos, description, etc. In that case, it might make sense to have their items in here as well. or maybe just your items. I think just having the container allows you as the coder to make that decision of like what interactable items come in here. So with all those, you can just drag them into the conversation and do stuff that way. I don't think we're missing anything. Let me take a drink and look at our feedback again. So, looking at these, this was a common problem across both games. And I think that in many games, it's probably solved easily enough with having your items here and having like a currency here where you can just bribe people to get your scores back. So that might be nice. We can't really do that in either game because you don't have a currency. But as we build out a more general system, maybe more games will have a currency when they're not just small demos. This image can change. That would be cool. As we talk to the character, we can regenerate new images for them, maybe standing in different ways or with different facial expressions, etc. We can have it so if you hover over a message here, maybe the actual change to these is like highlighted in a way. So you've got the text space like fame +5, but the fame bar can also have 5 units in yellow or something like that where it did change, so you can just scroll through and hover over stuff and see what changed. And I think all of this does make things very more dynamic visually. So there's a lot more happening on screen. It's not just literal text and then you press enter and it's more text. Yeah, so I think things are looking good. We will probably build the functionality for this next week. But last thing I want to do is maybe mock out just what a single message looks like in this message container. And I believe that goes in viewport content, which is suspiciously not the full size, but we'll deal with that next week. Let's go ahead and create an empty message, which extends the full width. It's probably a decent height. Each message will have a speaker image avatar and also a message speech bubble, which we will use panel for. And we can make that smaller. We can make this a horizontal layout group with a height. I guess just control the height here. Why are you negative? Oh, gotcha. So let's control. Well, we don't want to control the width because it'll make them equal, I think. Yeah. So let's just fill this guy. We'll just fill it manually. And then what we can do, I think, is depending on the speaker, yeah, we can just reorder these. So when we talk, the avatar's on the left. When they talk, the avatar's on the right, and so on. So in the speech bubble, we will obviously have some text. Message. That'll fill into the whole bubble. And we'll probably give that a little bit of padding somewhere. Can't remember where. Not super important until we style it. We'll say text message. We'll round off the corners on the avatar. This guy will give some, not spacing, but padding. On the left, like 20 and 20 maybe. And so that'll give us messages. In here, we'll do some custom background for each message. Is it fine? So now, in our content, we can put a vertical layout group here with some padding on top and bottom, and probably spacing between each. And then when we have multiple messages, we will get them to auto populate through. We probably don't actually want to do that on the content itself because we want the height to just keep increasing. And I think the content is, what's used to determine the height of the scroll rect. But this gives us a sense of like how things should look. When it's nice and large, it'll go on through. You can scroll on through. Obviously, we'll auto scroll to the bottom. For some messages, we want to reverse the ordering to make it clear that it's coming from other people. We'll turn those into prefabs. When you hover over one, it'll show the changes to these. Yeah, I think this looks decent for a full screen UI. In this demo specifically, let's close this real fast. We will probably have quite a lot of transparency on it, so we can see like the flickering light of the lighter in the background, and the vent that we're talking to, the wall. Maybe what we can do is position the camera such that the vent and the wall is here, and then we can take this and disable it so we see a lot more of the game scene, the 3D scene. That's probably what I would expect people to do in like 3D games where there is an NPC you're talking to. Maybe you can just center the camera such that they are front and center here, and then you see them like in the game world. You can use your existing animations. If people walk by, you could see them in the camera and so on. But maybe you put a little button down here to like show an info card or something. But this looks like it's still very visually cluttered. We probably want this to like scale based on the contents inside. We want this to scale based on the contents inside, and probably also be scrollable so you can scroll on through. These guys obviously need styled. Everything needs styled, but this is a pretty good start for what we're going to do the functionality for. We spent most of this time just kind of reviewing chat systems, and I think this incorporates all those observations we had. So if you've stuck along the whole time, thanks for sticking around. Normally we do a lot more code, but occasionally weeks like this we talk more about the game design itself, sometimes game theory, whatever really. It's all under purview when you make the whole game. So Thanks for joining me. My name's Andrew. My co-founder Andrew as well is, I think, also in the chat. So feel free to stick around. We do streams of game dev every Tuesday. We're starting to add a few more streams to our weekly schedule, so you can either follow us, or our Discord for game developers is linked in the description. We'd love to have you there. We post every time we go live there. We are Chroma Golem. We're experimenting with AI in video games and figuring out what new mechanics they can enable. Looking for emergent mechanics, specifically in strategy games that are kind of magical feeling, very cool to the player, making the games that we want to play ourselves. So if that sounds fun, stick around. We got a lot of cool stuff on the horizon, so would love to have you along. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you guys next week, Tuesday, 1 p.m. PST. See you then.